So welcome everybody to the Newburyport Literary Festival. My name is Jennifer Entwistle and I am the co-director of the festival, and I want to thank you all for being here. We are so happy to be able to bring you these events online, and I want to give a shout out to A Mighty Blaze, where we are live streaming this on Facebook, on their Facebook page right now. So thank you to them. We are currently using the webinar version of Zoom, which means that we can't see or hear the audience, but you can communicate with us through the chat mechanism. And when it comes time for Q&A, we ask that you use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your questions for the authors. This session is 30 minutes, so when we get to about the 20-minute mark, we will start doing some questions. And please also note that in the chat, I put in a few links to our independent booksellers, as well as a link to Chris's book, Plague, which is available on Amazon. We hope that you will certainly want to read these books after the session, so we wanted to make sure you knew how to reach them. And with that, I think we can get started. So I would like to introduce our authors. Anne Easter Smith is the award-winning author of 6 historical novels about the York family during the War of the Roses. The Son of York is the culminating book in her York series, with Richard as the protagonist. Before becoming a published author, Anne wore many hats in her life: executive secretary in London, Paris, and New York, PBS auction coordinator and program guide editor, folk singer, tournament tennis player, features editor at a daily newspaper, and most recently, actor and director on Newburyport's community stages. Chris Humphreys has written 11 adult novels, including Plague, which won the Arthur Ellis Award for Best Crime Novel in Canada in 2015. He has an MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia. He's now writing epic fantasy with the Immortals Blood trilogy for Golance. The first book, Smoke in the Glass, was published in 2019, and The Coming of the Dark is, well, coming in summer of 2020. So welcome very much, Anne and Chris.
Thank you very much, Jen. And great job, by the way, you're doing on the festival. It's very exciting to be here. And I hope we have an audience from all over the world. The nice thing about this was I forgot, I brushed my teeth and put my nail polish on, and then I realized, well, it doesn't really matter. So anyway, welcome everybody.
And I'd like to apologize for my lockdown haircut, but it's that time, isn't it? So I'm experimenting, and my lockdown beard, it's like a playoff beard.
And it's lovely to have Chris join us from Salt Spring Island in British Columbia. I am going to, we're going to use a few photos and slides just to illustrate our chat today, and we'll be passing back and forth and discussing. And as I'm a member of the History Police, I have to start by putting up a few facts. Now, bear with me because this is all new to me to do this video sharing. I don't know, can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet, obviously. No, okay. So, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Never mind. I need my techie here.
Ah, he's in.
There it is. Okay.
So now say share.
Yeah. Okay. I think there we go. Oh yes. Yes. So both Chris and I dealt with the Bubonic Plague in our books. Mine in the 15th century. The biggest one was in the 14th century, and Chris is in 1665, the Great Plague of London. So as you can see, that little creature up there was the cause, Yersinia pestis, and he was a flea that bit a human host and gave them the plague. And the symptoms were large black boil-like eruptions, often in the armpit, neck, or groin, most uncomfortable, and they produced headache, acute fever, and bloody vomit. Recovery was frequent if the bubo was lanced. Or it just broke by itself and the pus went out. and death occurred in 60 to 90% of cases and fairly soon afterwards. The Black Death in Europe was incredible. It claimed more than 200 million lives. And in those days, that was a huge amount of our European population. Took about 200 years for things to get back to where it was as far as population is concerned. And the Great Plague was mostly confined to London, and that took 800 people, and that was 1/4 of London's population. Yeah, 200,000. So most of the health directives for both my period, and I don't know if Chris would agree, was to isolate in rural areas or quarantine at home. In fact, Chris, there was a famous mantra about that was posted on churches and things like that. Do you remember what that was? We talked about that yesterday.
I'm not sure which one you refer to. You mean Lord God have pity upon us, or?
No, it said, leave quickly, go far, and come back slowly. So pretty much that's what we're doing today, I would say. We are trying to shut down quickly, isolate quickly, or go somewhere where you're quarantined, and then open up slowly is what they were saying. And it's pretty much what we're doing today. So I'm going to pass it over to Chris now that we've got some facts out of the way. And I will put up, this is his book. Sorry about this. This is not my cup of tea here. But so there is Chris's book. Now, Chris, you can tell us about your book.
Right. Do you want to stop sharing, Anne, so I can come back
Yes.
onto camera? That'd be grand. Hello. Yes. So I wrote this book, Plague, a few years back. Little did I know that it would bounce back into a form of popularity, which is a sort of slightly macabre way of looking at it, but people do seem to want to read about such things. Some people do, some people don't. Some people want to read the opposite, of course. But in a way, I've been thinking, gosh, am I exploiting this? But in a way, also, it is what historical fiction is read for, is to give us a sense of previous times, to maybe think, well, we're not too badly off. At least there are no buboes as of yet. But also to realize that we've been through this before, and we will emerge from it again. There are remarkable similarities. Of course, there were very different attitudes to it then. So much of it was believed to be God sent, and that's what my novel Plague really deals with. It's about it's really a religious fundamentalist serial killer story set against the backdrop of the Great Plague of London. But the fundamentalists of the time, people like the Fifth Monarchists, who are my villains, they really exploited the situation, because they never found out about that flea until about, I think, 1870 or something. That was when they discovered that the flea was responsible. What they thought at the time was that it was either a divine judgment or spread by what they called miasma.
Miasma, yes, right.
And so, what I was talking with Anne and Jen yesterday about was really, that we're not historians per se, we're historical fiction writers. And I think what you might be more interested in a literary festival is the writing of, i.e. how we took some of these facts of history, which is what we do, we historical novelists. I always say we use a fact as a springboard for the imagination. We're not giving a history lesson, we're using it to illustrate our characters, to advance a plot, all those things that we do as novelists. So I wanted to just share a little something with you about one of those incidents, how I did that. And perhaps while I'm finding my page, you could just put up the picture of the plague doctor that you have.
Yep.
So share your screen again and put that up. Oh, there's a bubo being lanced, so we'll talk about that.
Yes, that's just a general picture. And
Him as well.
yeah, I overshot it, did I?
Oh, did you? Oh dear.
The first thing after is cover.
Oh, is it?
No, it's not that one.
Oh, you know what? Well, don't worry about it. I can
There
say.
he is.
Oh, there he is. There's the fellow. So these are the gruesome figures that wandered about, and it's interesting because I was rereading a section where I used this fact as a springboard for the imagination. Why they had the beaks, which you'd think were horrible. But the doctor in this little snippet I'm going to share talks about how they stuffed herbs in there to prevent the miasma arriving. They also wore these, they were actually sort of leather, a lot of these cloaks, big leather gauntlets, all that stuff. Bizarrely, they would have prevented fleas biting them. Little did they know that they were actually quite effective in what they were doing. But I do have to dispute one of these facts that Anne beautifully came up with there. The lancing of the bubo was by no means a frequent recovery method. More often than not, the shock would kill someone. And I'm just going to give you a little, Anne, can you come back to me now? Sort of stop sharing again. Yeah. That would be good. Yes, hello me again. So I'm just going to read you, we're not really doing readings, but it saves me talking about it. So I'll just read you this little section where the fifth monarchists have come to one of their brothers who's got the buboes, and the doctor has come. And so here we go. They're all holding his limbs open so the doctor could administer to the bubo. Hezekiah's eyes shot open, and the first thing he saw was the approaching doctor, bottle in hand. "The devil comes for me," he shrieked, flinging off a man at one arm, seizing Simeon by the collar. "Do not let him touch me, brother. He wishes to do something. Down there." He hissed this last, his tormented gaze towards his groin. "It cannot even be touched, not a finger laid upon it for the agony. 'Tis only a salve he puts there, Hezekiah. Have faith, pray to God as I do. You will be healed." He looked at the others. "Our Father," he began, "who art in heaven." The prayer filled the small room, with a wife, sons, brethren joining in. It stilled the patient a little. He closed his eyes, murmured the words. From the bird's beak came a chuckle. "Only a salve," the man said. "I like that." Then he stooped and poured acid on the bubo. Sorry, if you're still there, I'm sorry if I haven't driven a lot of you out of the room with that. But yes, that's the sort of treatment they did. They either lanced it or poured acid upon it. So it was fairly ghastly. No, nearly everyone died, lanced buboes or not. Just a couple of other facts before I go back to Anne, and she talks about a different kind of plague. I was reconsidering some of the things that those springboards, those facts were used. One of them I was particularly drawn to was the fact that, because they had no idea that it came from fleas on rats, but they decided that it must be somehow connected with all these filthy animals they had around. So the edict went out in London to kill all the cats.
Cats, yeah.
Kill all the cats and kill all the little dogs. So what happens when the two main rat predators are killed? Rats thrive. So of course, sadly, ironically, they were writing the death sentence for so many people because of those preventative actions.
Superstition, yes, superstition, yeah.
And one other last little bit before I hand back to Anne, and we've got to get on to questions. The London had never, I start one chapter with London had never smelt so sweet, because what they did do was they got rid of all the garbage. They forced those injunctions which were meant to apply that you couldn't leave garbage in the street. And they used to fire off these stink bombs, but they were filled with cinnamon and ginger and gunpowder. They'd fire them from muskets to clear the air to get rid of the miasma. So of course, that's a fact I have to use as well.
Yeah, so some of the medieval cures, I think yours sound a little bit more modern, where you plucked the rear and back of a live chicken and you strapped it to the bubo. And then you, after a while, you took the chicken off and you washed it. They were very good about washing the chicken, but then they'd strap it back on. It was live still. And they did that until either the chicken or the patient died. So that's some of them. And then another thing they did was they actually made paste out of human waste. And some people would bathe themselves in urine, and the urine collectors of the time made a fortune from doctors who were searching for people who collected the urine, so that people could bathe in them. The most common medicinal thing they used was called theriac, and it was like treacle that they put on there, and it had 80 ingredients, and some of them were very expensive, like emerald dust, so only the rich people could have theriac. Yes, I was going to talk about, in my book, I'll put a picture, this is my first book, A Rose for the Crown, and I do have the Black Death plague, the bubonic plague in there, but this one also had this mysterious, the English sweating sickness, which arrived in England in the summer of 1485, which was the summer when Richard III ended up dead on the field of Bosworth in late August. And writing it into my book was, how I came upon it was that one of Richard's so-called friends and counselors was also a fence sitter. And he decided he didn't like the look of Richard's chances when Henry Tudor came over. So he begged to go back to his property and get more soldiers for Richard. So Richard gave him leave to go back north. And then he wrote a letter saying, I'm terribly sorry, I'm going to be late for the battle because I have the sweating sickness. Well, that was my first little inclination about what is the sweating sickness. So then I went and did some research and found out that this was, they don't know how it came there. They think it was a hantavirus now, came from a rodent that is now extinct in Europe, because they've never, today they don't even know how it came about. But the onset was very sudden, it was very infectious, headaches, myalgia, fever, profuse sweating, and labored breathing. And that was what killed people. It sounds like the coronavirus. It gradually just shut down your lungs. And death came as soon as 12 to 24 hours. It was very fast moving. And so the way I used it was not only to do this historically accurate thing about Thomas Stanley not showing up at Bosworth, and then he sat on the sidelines and waited to see which way the battle was going, and then he eventually went over to Henry's side, and that's how one of the reasons Richard lost the battle. But I decided that Richard's illegitimate daughter, who we know married a nobleman in Wales, Richard gave his illegitimate daughter to a lord in Wales, and that was in 1485, April. But by 1486, the man was named in a letter as a widower. So somewhere in between there, Catherine, Richard's illegitimate daughter, had died, and we don't know how. So I decided to have her die of the sweating sickness so I could actually write about it and describe it, since I'd done all my research, and it was something new and different, and Catherine needed to die. So she was a big part of my story. So anyway, so there's the sweating sickness.
Now, are we, Jen, we just saw your lovely photograph here, but not you in person. Oh, hello, there you are.
I'm back. I'm back.
Is it, I know we haven't, it's also too brief this. Have we got time for some questions? Or?
We definitely do, and questions are coming in. So the first one I want to hit is a question about, because it was in the description. So can you tell us about the song Ring Around the Rosie, and how that is affected in your book?
Oh yeah. Oh, indeed. Yes. Well, it was so interesting because you know, like Anne, when she wrote the original pitch for this, like I assumed that what I'd been told from childhood on was "Ring a Rosie" was a great plague children's song based on, you know, ringing around the roses and we all fall down, we all die of the plague, and I was quite content, and I wrote that in my book, and then only to discover. and I can't remember, it was in my further reading, that song was actually probably written in the 1870s.
Oh, damn research.
Really? But luckily I caught it. So eventually I can't remember what song I came up with in the end. I came up with a different song that they all played because I needed these kids to be sort of dancing in a macabre way around this slum courtyard. So I came up with a different dancing song, but it was slightly annoying. Yeah, Ring a Ring a Roses.
No, slightly annoying. Well, it's very annoying for me. You caught it. I have it in A Rose for the Crown as being a Black Death song. So
don't tell anyone that.
I know, but that's one of the drawbacks about being a historical novelist is that they're always doing research, and you think you've done everything you need to do, and you write your book, and there it is in print, and then 2 years later they find Richard III's grave, and now we know he did have scoliosis. So what do? It's
So someone asks about miasma. You referenced that a few times, and they're asking, what do you mean when you say miasma?
Miasma is
vapors sort of in the air.
Yeah, vapors in the air, basically. It's a sort of,
which actually it was actually correct. Droplets are vapors in the air.
Indeed, that's true. But actually not for that's true of coronavirus, but not true of bubonic plague, because it was the fleas biting you that got you. Yeah, so that's what and I always like that word. I think I have used it in a novel, miasmic. That idea of
very nice.
vapors flowing over. You always try to use words like that if you can.
Yeah, yes, and the other thing I don't know about in your time, but in the Black Death, they blamed. They always tried to find blame. This is a punishment from God, and so of course the Jews got blamed. And I've got a picture of them. Burning Jews in Europe during the Black Death, and lepers and beggars and anybody they didn't like, they would blame and burn or persecute. So yeah.
Well, we can see parallels with that now, because it's always a human trait to other people, isn't it? It's the other is doing it to us. So
right.
Another question.
Yes. So Chris, what is the most important lesson from your research and writing with respect to today's plague?
The most important lesson, well, the only way to beat it is to go into lockdown. And if you get out there and party like it's 1999 or whichever way you choose to party, you're going to spread it. It was much crueler then, of course, because they just locked up plague victims. As soon as they showed any signs, they were literally boarded up with
a big cross on the door. Yes.
Yeah. So I think the lesson is that unwittingly, because they knew so little about it, but unwittingly they stumbled across the only method that would shut it down, really, which was isolation.
Isolation. The same with the Black Death. It's amazing. Yeah.
Anne, your novels all hinge on some fantastic research. Do you ever come across a fact that runs counter to the direction you want your stories to go? And then how do you handle that?
Oh gosh, how do I handle it? Well, I do try and be accurate, I have to say, and I can think of one instance when I wanted this woman to really put on a good show, and she was quite ill, and so I have her ladies in waiting put some makeup on her face, and I didn't know what they used for lipstick, and so I started researching it, and I spent half a day looking up how they did lipstick in those days. And it turns out they used to use, because there's no raspberries, and it was the winter, so they didn't have anything like that. They used fruit sometimes. So I found out it came from the juice of some plant. Well, I researched the plant, and it was from South America, and 1492 hadn't happened. So I just left the whole thing out of the book. I mean, I just had her say, oh, make me look nice or something like that. But I had hoped to put a little bit of knowledge into the makeup that they used, and I was thwarted. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good example. So let's see. So for Chris, authorities made decisions that unintentionally contributed to the plague due to being uninformed or ignorant. Do you see parallels in today's pandemic? I'm thinking of the evolving and contradictory advisories about masks or going indoors.
Well, I'm trying to think of specific things. I mean, I think that we do as humans often make snap decisions out of ignorance that contribute to the spread rather than the curtailment of the plague. You know, I wouldn't like to draw this out too long because I know we haven't got much time, but I think there are going to be, for sure, instances of where they got it badly wrong and a lot of people suffered for it. You know, the truth that is apparent now, if I can, you know, be a bit of a sociologist as well, is that it's disproportionately affects people who are already disproportionately affected by society. So it was the people in the slums who died. It was the people who lived 12 to a room, obviously. And
the kings would move to the country.
Yeah, the rich people, the king and the court went to Oxford. You know, it's not that people in high positions don't catch it. I mean, you know, Boris, of course, being one. But you know, I think well, what is interesting to me about this whole thing, without wanting to get political about it at all, it's just a fact, is that we're going to have to address some of those things. The fact that so many people in care homes have died, you know, because of the way care homes are managed. Now that's today. They didn't have care homes. You know, care homes in the 1665 was basically stick granny in the corner, you know, until she was too demented to be with you any longer anyway. So, but I think the parallels are there, that we can, I mean, that's why we read historical fiction. You know, that's why I write historical fiction, at least, is to try to explain today's world to myself. I think there are going to be many things we can look back at in the plagues and the sweating sickness that Anne's talking about, and consider that maybe if we'd read our Daniel Defoe a year ago, we might have made a few better choices.
Interesting, yes. Yeah, actually, Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, who was in Henry VIII's time, he died of the sweating sickness. There were 4 other epidemics in England, but it never was anywhere else. It wasn't in Wales, and it wasn't up in Scotland. And anyway, he was probably the most famous person who died of the sweating sickness.
Here's a question for Anne. What comfort do you take from your research while navigating this virus?
Well, as a matter of fact, I am not researching at the moment. I do not have another book planned at the moment. So I'm taking a break from research, but I do find myself fascinated by this whole coronavirus and the ways that so many people are passing on misinformation, and that's very historical. How many rumors and things get put into history books, and you know, then it becomes fact. I was interested this morning listening to the author of the Mary Surratt book, because I had seen a movie with Robin Wright Penn, and where she was innocent, this Mary Surratt, who is supposed to be the only woman who'd been hanged in America because of the Lincoln assassination. And, you know, I never read anything more about her. And I went to see this movie and I thought, oh, this poor woman. Well, listening to this author today who'd done her research, it wasn't true. She was guilty as hell, this woman. So, you know, you just, I just love all of this kind of, as soon as I see something on TV, I go and have to research it afterwards. So I do like to do that a lot, yes.
So we are running out of time, but why don't I ask one more question? So I'll throw this one to Chris. So some of your characters died. How did you incorporate what you knew about them into how they handled grieving rituals? Were there places and time to grieve?
Well, that's very interesting. I was listening to a radio program here in British Columbia today about from an American funeral director and poet, actually, called Thomas Lynch, and he was talking about what I suppose they would have been called in Hamlet curtailed rites. You know, when Ophelia was buried outside the city because there was a suicide and all that, and the limits curtailed rites place on mourning. It would have been, I mean, I do deal with that in Plague, when in one of those boarded up houses, the victim dies, as happens to one of my main characters. He's got a lot of young children, and one of those children dies of the plague. You know, the family doesn't come out and mourn the child. The child is, you know, basically thrown out the window onto the death cart as the guy goes by with that classic phrase that has been so, you know, we stuck in our head because of Monty Python now, but bring out your dead. Bring out your dead, you know, and that's what they did. And so like today, when so many people are losing their loved ones, particularly the elderly, and unable to give them a hug or unable to you know, attend a proper mourning, I think it's going to take a toll on our society. I think a lot of people are going to be processing that for a long time. My characters, yeah, they would have experienced exactly the same thing, maybe slightly worse, in that they couldn't go and stand under a window and wave. You know, they literally, it was the body was in the cart and they were taken out to moor fields, and I don't know how much detail you want, but they weren't treated very well out there. But that's where they were buried, outside the city walls. So.
Yes, here is a picture of how many coffins, look at them all, going into the grave, just shoved them in. They're just piles and piles of them. This is from the Black Death.
Well, in the Great Plague of London, I'm sure in the Black Death as well, there were pits. There were no coffins.
Coffins, exactly.
They were just pits. Yeah, there was so it was. Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question, and again, I think one of the joys of historical fiction is that, of course, we want to see the differences in the world and how we've changed, but we also want to acknowledge that people are the same. You know, some of their attitudes change, some of their knowledge, of course, of science and, you know, things changes, but humans have reacted the same way. This is why the great plays of yesteryear, you know, Shakespeare and stuff, are so relevant today, and the books are still relevant. Defoe is amazing. If you read Daniel Defoe, Journal of the Plague Year, that was my Bible for my research, because you know, you just catch that exactly, that people change, but they don't change.
Well, on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to end. Thank you all for your comments. I see a lot of people are saying great program, but too short. So I wish we could keep going, but we do have one more event for the Literary Festival after this. So Chris and Anne, thank you so much for joining us, and to all of the attendees, thank you very much. Hopefully everyone will come to the next event, and have a great afternoon.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Chris.